I'm Tara Dautel, a product specialist here at Noteable. Today I'm going to give you a tour of some of Notable's exciting new features for ABA. Here at Noteable, everything we do is with simplicity in mind. I'm going to start by demonstrating how simple it is to set up an individualized treatment program with the behaviors and objectives you want to work on. Then I'll show you how the mobile app makes it easy to collect data in session and what it looks like to sync collected data right into a clinical record. Finally, we'll take a look at some of the graphing capabilities Noteable provides and wrap up by showing you how to produce and share custom reports with graphs included. Let's talk about behaviors and objectives. With Noteable, each client's treatment plan is individualized. We have our objectives, which are utilized to design and prescribe treatment. We also have behaviors, which are used to measure purely behaviors for clients. With that, we can take a minute to review some of Notable's measurement type options for those objectives and behaviors. For Mallory's behavior of aggression, I noticed the type of measure would be rate. If I select Edit, I can now adjust my short name for this behavior and operational definition. I can also take a look at all of my options for measurement type and select the one that would work best for collecting data on this specific behavior in session. For Mallory's behavior of screaming, we can see duration was selected as the measure rather than rate. On to objectives. Let's start with our percent of measured opportunities for alternative choice. When I go into this objective, I'll be able to see that measurement selection as well as how many trials we are looking for throughout each session. I can also see the mastery criteria, which will outline what my percent of measured opportunities data needs to look like in order to progress with this objective. For our next measurement type, we're going to take a look at client Tim Williams. Tim is working through a task analysis for hand washing. When I take a closer look at this objective, I'll see the same template as my previous objective. However, since this is a TA, we will need to include all steps for that analysis to collect data on. Since this is baseline, I have each step open for collection. With Noteable, I can control which steps in my TA are open with forward or backward chaining throughout my objective phases. This hand washing happens to be a backward chain, so as you can see, my steps gradually open as we move throughout this objective. The last measure we'll take a look at will be with client Cliff Smith. We'll get into his duration of engagement objective and review a whole interval measure. We see the measurement selection here, which will prompt you to include an interval length for this objective's data collection. My interval length will remain the same throughout this objective, but as my client progresses, we will adjust the observation length in the phase editor. We can see that starts with 5 minutes, then 6, continuing to increase until we reach our goal of a full 10 minutes. When we create our objectives for client treatment plans, Noteable also takes into account setting up targets, target sets, and phases. We'll jump into this one-word request objective for an example. Here we can see the plan for this objective to move through baseline, intervention, and maintenance phases. Each target is situated in its own row and labeled accordingly. We have 5 target sets for intervention, and those same target sets planned out to generalization. My generalization target sets have available targets of mom and dad, so I can identify specifically who was being observed when taking my data. A huge benefit to Noteable is its ability to run concurrent generalization phases, meaning once we get this first target set juice to maintenance with a clinician, we can start baseline trials and generalization for that same target set. While in intervention with the clinician, we move on to the baseline data for our next target set, CHIPS. We can repeat this process as we continue through the objective, moving along intervention and respective generalization data for different target sets at the same time. Additionally, we can organize phases with Notable's drag and drop feature to ensure our objective is mapped out as accurately as possible. For example, when taking baseline data for CHIPS, I notice my client only needs partial echoic prompting rather than full. I can go ahead and adjust my prompt fading schedule to reflect that adjustment. Our date located at the top of each objective will let us know when this objective was opened. This is the same process for each phase within the objective. Looking at baseline, I can tell data collection was opened as of March 22nd. From there, we opened the first intervention phase on March 29th. Once we progress to partial echoic prompting, I'll need to go into that phase editor and set the date I want data collection to begin. I will not be able to start collecting data in this phase until that date is set. The last piece I want to review for objective planning are these prompt codes. Prompt codes are customizable to what you need for each objective. For one-word demands, I've selected incomplete, fully echoic, partially echoic, and independent. As my objective moves through phases, I can change what is considered a passing prompt code for my data. Here in baseline, the only code I have selected is independent. However, after I've completed baseline and moved to my first intervention phase of fully echoic prompting, my passing codes will need to be adjusted. I now have fully echoic, partially echoic, and independent all considered passing codes for this phase. As I move through my objectives, I can fade my prompt codes to reflect what is considered passing at that stage of my objective, until eventually the only successful code will be independently verbalizing that one-word demand. Each of my objective phases are clearly marked in my client's data graphs. I can see data collection for the first phase started on March 19th. The following phase opened on March 29th and is easy to see with the phase change line presented in the graph. The data was first collected for this phase on March 30th. As we noted, each phase will appear in the same graph but be marked with a phase line once there are changes. With that, each target set will appear as its own graph under the objective. Next up, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look into Notable's mobile data collection. The Notable app prescribes the data capture controls for a session based on whichever measurement type was selected for each objective and behavior. It's easy to start and stop timers, increment counters, and track skill acquisition attempts with one hand while still staying engaged with clients. Let's get started with some session planning for client Cliff Smith. Here I can see a list of all 5 objectives Cliff is currently working on, but in the app I'm only going to select the specific objectives I want to work on today in session before clicking Start Now. This will bring me to my session view screen where I can see all the objectives I've selected for session today, as well as all behaviors being tracked for this client. In the top left corner of my app, I see my reorder option. This allows me to prioritize the view of my objectives. If I know my parent training objective is the very first thing I'm going to work on, I can move it to the top of my screen for easier access. Once I have my session organized, I can select Start. This will activate all of my data collectors and start my session time. The first data collector I want to take a closer look at is our task analysis for the parent training objective. Once I select Start Task Analysis, all of my TA steps will appear and I can collect data as I observe in real time. After I've finished collecting my data, I'll select Save Trial, and now I'm ready to either run another trial for this objective or move on. The second type of measure we can look at is a latency for the self-care tasks objective. Latency will give me a simple start-stop timer for each demand in this objective. What's great about Notable is the app makes it easy to collect data on objectives and behaviors at the same time. For example, if Dad asks Cliff to wash his hands, then Cliff throws magnets off of the refrigerator, we can track that property destruction without interfering with our latency timer. Next up, we have whole interval data collection for the duration of engagement objective. We can see here that the observation time is currently set at 5 minutes with 1-minute intervals. Noteable will keep track of our time once I select Start Interval and notify me by vibrating after each minute has passed. While Cliff is working on duration of engagement, if Dad engaged in differential reinforcement, I can go to my task analysis and enter that second child data while my whole interval timer continues to progress. Again, my behavior trackers are always available. If Cliff becomes non-compliant, I'm going to start tracking that behavior without disrupting objective data. So I went ahead and selected Start. While I'm tracking on compliance, my whole interval timer will notify me that 1 minute has passed. I can go ahead and select my negative prompt code since the client is engaging in maladaptive behavior and my timer is already continuing on to the next minute. In the meantime, Cliff has started to comply. I can end my behavior timer. I can also go ahead and select my negative prompt code for that second interval since non-compliance was still happening when it started. The last measure I want to review is our percent of measured opportunities for the functional communication training objective. This is going to show us the prompt code options that are assigned to this objective. Each objective has this drop-down option where I can review my full objective, measurement type, operational definitions, mastery criteria, procedure, which will identify my prompt codes in more detail, and suggested trial count all the way at the bottom. So if I needed a refresher on my prompt codes, I just reviewed the objectives procedure in detail, and now I know for sure I'm looking at independent, gesture, model, partial echoic, and fully echoic as my choices for data collection. So if Cliff is visibly starting to become frustrated, I can give a verbal start to how he could ask for a break. He successfully asked afterwards. I can collect that as partially echoic, and we're ready to continue. I know my whole interval timer is still going. I'll enter my data and we're going to fast forward to the end of this session. So here we are at the end of session. All of my data is collected. I'm going to select End at the top of the screen. The app will ask me to make sure I definitely want to end session. Yes, I do. I noticed that some of my behavior counters were still at 0. It wants to make sure it should send 0, and I didn't just forget to enter that. Yes, send 0. Session data has now been sent to Noteable. We're going to head over to this case note for the session we just completed. The case note template is up under Save Mobile Session. I can select my session from today. Immediately, all of my data appears in my case note. I'll read through it to make sure everything looks good. I have my behaviors at the bottom. For my rate data, I'm just going to make sure I have use session duration selected. Back to the top where I'll type in any anecdotal notes. So for this session, let's see, the clinician was at the client's home, the client was there, and so was client's dad. Perfect. We click to finalize, and there is our complete case note from today. Here we are back at the Objectives tab, ready to start looking at our data graphs, which are going to be updated with all the data we just put into that case note. We can see our March 30th date already in here for duration of engagement. Our PTO graph has also been updated. We can see specific data points for each step of our task analysis. Those steps are clearly labeled and color-coded at the top of the graph. There's also a phase line here for March 26th, letting us know that this is when the objective moved from baseline to intervention with dad running it at home. There's also this event line plotted between sessions on March 25th, and that is there to let us know the client had a medication change on that day. If we move back to the top of the graph, we can look at some viewing options for our data. Right now, we have all of our TA steps separated out. If we wanted all of those steps presented as a whole, we could aggregate the steps to bring it all together. View the graph a little bit cleaner, and there is even the option to bring in trend lines to assist with analysis. Noteable allows for the customization of all clinical reports. Let's take a look at building an ISP for client Mallory James. By selecting Add ISP, I'll open my report template. Noteable will automatically pull in relevant data, and I'll also have the ability to customize each section. Now I can see my client's goal and all the details around it, including their data graphs for objectives. If there are graphs I haven't collected data on yet, I can remove them, so now set 1 is all that is visible for objective 1. I can go ahead and repeat this customization process for each of my objectives throughout the ISP. My last objective is this task analysis. We can leave the steps individually plotted and named at the top of the graph for a very detailed breakdown, or I can aggregate my steps for a simple combined view of progress on this objective. Once I've made my customizations and reviewed the details in this report, I can go ahead and stamp my signature. I'll include the date, and then I'm ready to finalize. I can now review my finalized report in Noteable, but I also have the option to print, fax, and/or export this report moving forward. So we defined our individualized treatment plan, collected data in session, and pulled it right into the clinical record, analyzed the data in graph form, and included graphs in our reports. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration of Noteable ABA.
Thank you for watching this introduction to Noteable ABA, part of the Noteable Behavioral Service Platform. If you want to find out more about Noteable, including how it can help you better manage your whole practice, go to www.notablenow.com.